Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So in the last couple of hours, Number 10 announced that Gavin Williamson is to become the new Secretary of State for Defence. He replaces Sir Michael Fallon, who announced his departure from government last night, as the row over sexual impropriety and harassment continues to sweep through Westminster. Laura Kunzberg, our political editor, joins us now. You interviewed Michael Fallon. You, in fact, broke the story that he resigned. How big a loss is he to government?
Well, I think he's a significant loss to Theresa May. He was one of the people that she'd worked alongside for many years. He had served 4 different prime ministers in various different roles, somebody with huge experience, somebody who's has been pretty well liked and well respected in Westminster, and Theresa May did rely on him to some extent. And remember, the cabinet had been very, very delicately balanced, not just in terms of Brexit and backwards and forwards, but also in terms of experience, the different generations. And for her to lose, therefore, somebody who had been vital in that critical balance and somebody who's been around for a long time with real presence, that certainly is a loss. The irony of all of this is, in the kind of roller coaster of politics, he was someone who was always meant to be Mr. Reliable.
Yes, a safe pair of hands, as they used to talk about him. He used to do all the interviews and come out batting.
That's right. I mean, he's more used to defending errant colleagues than having to defend himself.
But he's gone, and in a very, I think, a big surprise to a lot of people, Gavin Williamson, the Chief Whip, also in a very important, critical role in terms of managing this minority government and a loyal, trusted ally of the Prime Minister, has now been promoted into the Cabinet. He attended Cabinet, but now is in the Cabinet as the new Defence Secretary. What's the reaction?
Well, I have to say it's pretty mixed. I mean, look, first of all, Gavin Williamson is seen as a very smart politician. He's a very effective operator. He was David Cameron's PPS, the Parliamentary Private Secretary, essentially the connection between the backbenches and the Prime Minister. So as such, he knows the 1922 inside out. He knows the backbenches. He knows everyone's secrets as the Chief Whip. And he also was the manager of Theresa May's leadership campaign. So he's been in a very important position for a long time. He's definitely smart. He's definitely talented. He's definitely ambitious. However, some people I've spoken to this morning are, I have to say, nothing apart from furious at this. He's never been a minister before. One minister suggested to me that this is appalling because basically Theresa May looks so weak she has allowed Williamson to promote and appoint himself. Somebody else has just said to me, a former minister has just said this is completely outrageous to put him into this big plum job, particularly at such a crucial time, not just when the government doesn't have its own majority, but also when they're in the middle of this emerging brouhaha around harassment allegations, when the Tory party, as the other political parties, are trying to work out whether or not some more of their number are going to have to quit their jobs too.
I mean, as a former army officer, is he suited, Gavin Williamson, to the job of Defence Secretary?
Yes, I think he is, and I think it's very important. I mean, Laura's made some interesting points, but I would disagree. This is evidence that the Prime Minister takes defence seriously. She's put in one of her most trusted aides, her most trusted advisors, into an absolutely crucial job at a time when she realises there are some very difficult decisions coming for defence. So I think this is an opportunity for the MOD to get its case heard at the very highest levels of government and to defend the assets and capabilities that it's seeking to defend.
But what's his experience in that role? I mean, Richard Dannett, former Chief of the General Staff, has questioned his appointment. Yes, he backs it broadly, but he does question whether he is suited to that role. We can just hear, actually, what he had to say.
I would like to have seen one of the junior ministers in the Ministry of Defence promoted to be the Secretary of State for Defence, because coming from the defence background, they know the big issues that are really critical to defence at the present moment. But all that said, Theresa May is Prime Minister. She's got the job of leading our country. She needs support in the Cabinet, and therefore I fully respect her decision to appoint her former Chief Whip as the next Secretary of State for Defence. I wish him well in that difficult task. But as well as supporting his Prime Minister, he's got to make sure that he really battles hard for defence and probably argue, as Sir Michael Fallon was starting to do, for a modest increase in the defence budget.
He doesn't sound convinced, though.
Well, I think General Dannett knows extremely well that the technical experts in the MOD wear uniform and the politicians are there to take the political decisions. And what he's going to be surrounded with, what the new Secretary of State for Defence is going to be surrounded with, is people like the Vice Chief and the CGS and the First Sea Lord and the Chief of the Air Staff, who are going to come up with absolutely essential advice that he will listen to, and he will be making the political decisions. His job is not to be the technical expert on the range of aeroplanes or the capabilities of ships.
But the implication was that she did it from a position of weakness, not strength.
But I think the interesting thing about this really will be that there are positives and negatives to this appointment, no question. He's a smart guy, a talented guy, very loyal to Theresa May. There are going to be people, there already are people in the Tory party that are very unhappy about this. I think the broader point is this is not a decision that is risk-free. Theresa May could have taken a real safety-first decision. She could have promoted somebody from within the Ministry of Defence, Tobias Ellwood or Mark Lancaster, or moved someone across. This is a surprise move that potentially might have big benefits. It's potentially got big detractions, but it is not just a safety-first move. And remember, right now, the Tories, like the other political parties, cannot be sure that there will be other people who have to move. They've taken a calculation right now that they could just do this limited one up, one out, and a few other things around the edges, with Julian Smith and Esther McVey being promoted too. But it is not a safety-first decision at a time when the government can't know that they're out of danger.
Right, and as you say, it's a precision reshuffle.
Yes.
You didn't want to do a wide-ranging reshuffle. Let's have a look at the other people that have been moved. Gavin Williamson, there on the left, is now, as we've been discussing, become the Defence Secretary, and Julian Smith becomes the Chief Whip. He was the Deputy, so he has been promoted and will attend Cabinet. And then Esther McVey, newly elected, Esther McVey, Tory MP, becomes...
Newly re-elected.
Thank you. Has become the Deputy Chief Whip. Now, Julian Smith has a difficult job too, or they both have a difficult job, because Gavin Williamson has vacated that role of, yes, dealing with the ongoing sexual harassment and Brexit and universal credit in a minority government that is fragile.
Very tough. But also it should be noted, Julian Smith has been Gavin Williamson's deputy. He's therefore already been doing a lot of the operational legwork. You know, MPs are not going to be unused to having Julian Smith texting them, knocking at the door, saying, come on, this is what you're going to do. So in a sense, it's not a huge move for him to go up. But for Esther McVey, who's not been around for a while, to go back into that senior position in terms of party management, I think that is a bigger jump. One just brief point I would make, just looking at the three of them lined up there, that is in part, perhaps, that is a bit of an answer to some of the problems that many people in the Tory party feel that they have. Partly about the younger generation, but also about geographical reach. Victory for Yorkshire today. 2 promotions for Julian Smith and Gavin Williamson. Esther McVey, obviously from Merseyside, a North West MP. So that just is one of the other factors. It will change the look and the feel of the cabinet.
Although I think there was quite a lot of talk about perhaps a woman could have become the Chief Whip.
Absolutely. Penny Mordaunt had been tipped, but sorry, for Defence Secretary
and Chief Chief Whip. I mean, you said at one stage it would be great to be Prime Minister or Foreign Secretary.
What I was trying to say is it would be great to serve in any position.
Of course, and you were talked about as a potential Defence Secretary, certainly over the last sort of 24 hours amongst your colleagues. Were you waiting by the phone for a phone call? Were you expecting one?
I have been getting on with being Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and that is absolutely all dominant. But I'd like to say one thing about Esther's promotion. I think it's really important. Esther's got a rare talent. She's of 2 intakes, and as you know, in parliamentary terms, that's quite important. And she spent most of the last 6 months getting to know us from 2015, and of course her own second intake, as it were, the 2017 intake. So she is somebody who really does reach across the party in a particularly unique way, and so I think that's a fantastic appointment. Just
one very brief thought on that. I think we've discussed it before here on the Daily Politics, but it is a really important feature of the Tory party now. The 2015, 2010 and 17 intakes are now in the majority. So people for whom, in the context of this whole sort of emerging scandal around harassment and these kinds of allegations, I think the generational difference and the generational sort of shift in the power base actually really matters in the terms of that context, I think, because there are more people, I think, in the 1922 now who see allegations that have been swirling around as being obviously unacceptable and sort of from a different era. They're the ones who are increasingly in charge of the party.
And we're going to discuss that in just a moment. Laura Kunsbo, thank you very much.
Gavin Williamson has been named as the new Defence Secretary, less than 24 hours after Sir Michael Fallon resigned in the midst of sexual harassment claims at Westminster. His successor was appointed Chief Whip just over a year ago and has never held ministerial office. The 41-year-old now finds himself in one of the government's top jobs. Our political editor, Laura Kunsberg, reports.
Who would it be? Nervously waiting at the Ministry of Defence. He looked a bit fretful too. as he waited across the road at number 10.
Is it time to clean out the stables, Defence Secretary?
Then before long, Gavin Williamson emerged with the top brass.
I'm so sorry for dragging you up on this.
To take a proud walk across Whitehall into one of the biggest jobs in government. He's never worked in a government department before, though.
But it's a privilege to be able to step into this role, and what's so amazing is to have so many first-rate, world-renowned people to be working with, and the armed services are the greatest pride of our nation.
Until today, he was in charge of party discipline. Last month, he described his approach.
I don't much like the stick, but it is amazing what can be achieved with a sharpened carrot.
Less time for cheesy local MP pictures. Instead of managing his constituency and 315 Tory MPs, he's in charge of about 200,000 staff and £36 billion. Part of a rising Tory generation and a Yorkshireman to boot. And here's his replacement, Julian Smith, the new Tory arm twister-in-chief. One of Gavin Williamson's compadres, who seems to have inherited his tarantula. Yes, the giant spider the former Chief Whip kept on his desk.
Is it time to clean out the stables, Miss McVeigh?
The new number 2, Esther McVeigh, who says she'll add this to the mix.
Hopefully I can bring maybe a feminine touch to the Whip's office and work with all my colleagues.
The logic of Gavin Williamson's move over there is simple. He's a good operator and Theresa May trusts him. But the pushback has been fierce. One senior Tory told me he's abandoned his post at a crucial time. One minister suggested that he has outplayed number 10, saying Theresa May is so weak she has allowed him to appoint himself. And one former minister said this shows the government is in the grip of a bunch of boys. As ever in politics, the irony is rich. The man who was in charge of making sure that MPs behave has found himself in a plum new job because one of his colleagues did not.
And all the parties are readying themselves in case they have to defend their side from more potential allegations of bad behaviour. The Foreign Secretary, known for his interesting private life, said today he had nothing to hide.
Are you confident your behaviour has been what would be expected of a cabinet minister?
You bet. Thank you,
Foreign Secretary.
Number 10 acknowledges everyone has to do more to protect staff and victims at Westminster. And there are calls for wholesale change.
We've seen bullying allegations that's happened between members of staff. We've seen allegations of sexual impropriety between elected members and others. And this is all about power.
It's who holds that power and how they use it that sets the course.
Well, let's talk to Laura in Westminster now. And choosing a successor, a new Defence Secretary, was always going to be a balancing act for the Prime Minister. But Gavin Williamson's appointment has certainly caused some upset, as you pointed out.
It has, Sophie, partly because it was a really big surprise at this really big promotion. And MPs, particularly those who feel they've been passed over, are often a bit shirty, a bit stroppy around reshuffle time. There's nothing unusual in that. But the extent of the reaction to Gavin Williamson getting this job has been something rather different. MPs have been seething about this. Not all of them, but certainly a significant number. And I think there are two reasons for that. One of them, because I think some MPs on the backbenches in particular harbour a few suspicions about Mr Williamson's ultimate ambition. And second of all, the Tory party is in a restless and fragile and frankly grumpy state right now. So anything that comes as a big shock is almost bound to rattle the cages. But the former Chief Whip, now Defence Secretary, will have learnt in his time in charge of discipline that being effective and being popular are not the same thing. And that knowledge may well come in very handy with what faces him ahead.
Laura, thank you.
The unexpected resignation of Michael Fallon as Defence Secretary yesterday has been followed today by the equally unexpected appointment of Gavin Williamson as his replacement. The elevation of the Chief Whip, who ran Mrs May's successful Conservative Party leadership campaign but has never held ministerial office, has provoked disbelief and anger amongst some MPs. Political editor Gary Gibbon has this report.
Waiting for the new Defence Secretary. You don't want too many hours ticking by with no one in the top job here. Overnight, the Prime Minister temporarily took over the role. Someone must be available to take operational decisions at all times. And then this morning, Theresa May appointed the man who advises her on government appointments.
Do you know any more secrets, Minister? Have you got a clean record?
Her chief whip, Gavin Williamson. Is it hard recommending yourself for the job? As chief whip, his other responsibility was avoiding Commons defeats for the government. Reaction to his jump from that job wasn't universally warm. There was quite a lot of abuse for Gavin Williamson from Tory MPs today, a lot of them using the term self-serving. One said Theresa's made a very, very big mistake. Quite a lot of them say that Gavin Williamson should have stayed in his post as chief whip, supporting Theresa May. But instead, as one MP put it, he's now looking out for his own career. But one Tory former minister who crossed swords with Gavin Williamson in last year's Tory leadership contest says all that's too harsh.
In the leadership election, I was on the opposite side, and he did me up like a kipper. But
it can be quite brutal, can't it?
Yeah, no, I think he's a tough man. He's certainly not cuddly, but nevertheless, I think that he's got the qualities of competence, effectiveness, and loyalty that I certainly would be looking for in a Secretary of State for Defence.
One of your colleagues has said the real act of loyalty would have been to stay as chief whip and protect Theresa May, and that this might be a sign he's slightly given up on that.
Well, the good news is he's been replaced by Julian Smith.
Mr. Smith is a close ally of Gavin Williamson's. He and his new deputy, former Minister Esther McVey, has now tried to implement a change of culture where sexist, inappropriate behaviour and worse has taken hold.
Yes, I'm obviously very pleased to be a part of the government at this important time, and hopefully I can bring maybe a feminine touch to the Whip's office and work with all my colleagues, something that I'm really looking forward to. Thank you.
Westminster is far from convinced that the resignation of Sir Michael Fallon is the last this government and its whips will have to deal with. The new chief whip tweeted a photograph of the tarantula that Gavin Williamson kept in his chief whip's office. A menacing beast in contrast to the smiling sequence of photos on Mr. Williamson's Facebook page. He's been called the baby-faced assassin. And nabbing the warm-up slot at party conference just before the leader's speech, Mr. Williamson played up to his panto-villain role as chief whip.
For peddling of secrets, dark arts, the odd inducement, or even threat. But conference, please rest assured, some of this is fiction.
It does slightly remind one of the time when George Bush asked Dick Cheney to find him a vice president, and Dick Cheney ended up becoming the vice president.
House of Cards. We're watching it as a reality TV programme.
Well, yes. Well, let's hope that not all of the plot twists in the House of Cards come true.
As chief whip just after the snap election, Gavin Williamson was regarded as a force stabilising the government, just after the Prime Minister had lost her two most senior and trusted aides. As the Prime Minister approaches another period of vulnerability, as allegations swirl around MPs, as her own deputy, Damien Green, is under investigation, she's found it necessary to promote Gavin Williamson out of her inner circle, just when she could do with having trusted advisers close. Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News, Westminster.
Well, for more, let's go to our political correspondent, Michael Crick in Westminster. So, Michael, how has his appointment gone down?
Well, I think you've got to be fair. It's fair to say that there are a significant number of Conservative MPs who think it's a jolly good appointment. They think that Gavin Williamson was a good chief whip, and they think he'll make a good defence secretary. But it's striking how many people don't think that, and some are willing to voice their concerns publicly. Anna Soubry tweeted tonight that Mr. Williamson had picked himself a plum job, and of course, there's an element of jealousy, I think, in this, that people see a man who was only, 18 months ago, the parliamentary private secretary to David Cameron, his bag carrier, now running one of the great departments of state. A man who's never been a departmental minister before, never, amazingly, never actually addressed the House of Commons from the dispatch box. So this appointment is something of a risk, and there are those who think that Gavin Williamson will now be a leadership contender and will perhaps run for the leadership when Theresa May eventually steps down. He himself told his local paper this afternoon that he was flabbergasted by the appointment, which is a little surprising when you think that Mr. Williamson officially advises the Prime Minister on ministerial appointments. This is what Mr. Williamson said on camera a couple of hours ago.
Well, I've been a minister as Chief Whip, but it was a little bit quieter when he was Chief Whip. Not so much publicity, but it's a privilege to be able to step into this role. And what's so amazing is to have so many first-rate, world-renowned people to be working with.
So where does this lead the government?
Well, I think there is perhaps Theresa May have made a tactical error here in that Gavin Williamson was one of, 3 or 4 key figures around her in Downing Street, keeping her leadership in place, doing a really good job in most people's eyes as Chief Whip. She's now lost him across the road to the Ministry of Defence. And as Gary was saying earlier, there's of course this investigation going on into another of her close advisors, Damien Green. And if she were to lose Damien Green as well, then her position in Downing Street would be significantly weakened.
And any more to say about his predecessor, Michael Fallon?
Well, there's a lot of speculation today. Very few people think that Michael Fallon purely resigned because of the story involving Julia Hartley-Brewer 15 years ago and repeatedly touching her knee. There's an expectation that more allegations about Sir Michael could well come out in the next few days, possibly in the Sunday newspapers.
Michael Crick, thanks very much. John.
Now, we asked Number 10 and Conservative HQ and numerous Conservative MPs to join us this evening to discuss these latest developments in Westminster, but no one was available. I'm joined now from Gateshead by the Lib Dem leader, Vince Cable, and we'll talk about the interest rate rise with you in a moment. But let's just start with the matters that have brought things to a head in Westminster today, which is obviously the resignation of the Defence Secretary and his replacement by the Chief Whip. What do you make of that for a start?
Well, it's a little bit House of Cards, isn't it? Where the man who produced the ammunition which presumably led to Sir Michael's departure finds himself doing the job. I mean, I frankly have no idea what's going on in the government, but it is come across as weak, and Prime Minister who was not in a strong position in the first place is seriously struggling to exert her authority.
Now, you and the other party leaders, i.e. Mrs May in particular and Mr Corbyn, will be meeting to discuss what to do about all this and what kind of apparatus to set up so that people who have a genuine complaint about others will have the safety of doing so without some party apparatus sitting on them. What are you going to propose?
Well, I think we all have to acknowledge this is a very serious problem. There are the cases of criminal accusation, but there's certainly many cases of crass behaviour by men in relation to women, completely unacceptable, and we have to have a proper way of dealing with it. It involves, in many cases, an abuse of power. I think every party has had trouble, including mine. The way we've responded to it is by trying to set up a system within our parties whereby if a woman has been subject to harassment, there is an independent person that they can go to for support outside of their line of management, to have a code of conduct built around that. And in addition to what has to happen within individual parties, I think what will come out of the discussions early next week is a proposal to have this embedded in Parliament. Well,
embedded in Parliament, but free, surely, of party political, access in the sense that, I mean, even in your own party, when you investigated Lord Reynard, for example, who denied all the charges against him, but in fact, of course, you were in difficulties, and it would have been much better if the complainants had been able to go to an absolutely neutral parliamentary committee that could deal with it.
Well, indeed, and that may be what will come out of the discussions. I mean, I think the system we've established since that problem, which was, I think, 4 years ago, we have somebody who's called a pastoral care officer who is within the party but genuinely independent, has handled a lot of complaints, and as far as I know, it's working well. But anything that can strengthen this system and get us past what is a serious crisis of authority for politicians and Parliament is to be welcomed. And I'm, up for being constructive at all stages.
I mean, given that there was still a cloud hanging over Lord Reynard, although he's back in the party, was it good for you to be seen campaigning with him?
Well, he was one of, I think, 500 volunteers who came along and helped with my campaign. He's perfectly entitled to do that, and I don't see a problem with it. He has no role in my team. He's not a spokesman or an advisor, but he's an ordinary party member, and he's done what ordinary party members do at election time. I don't see a problem with that.
Let's move on then to the economy and to the decision to raise interest rates. You are generally against such a move, correct?
Well, I'm a bit concerned. I mean, we're talking about a group of experts, and we respect their judgment. I was one of the initial advocates of the Independent Bank of England. It was my maiden speech on it. It's a good structure, and we've got some really high-class people. But I do worry, to some extent, about what they have decided. Not that it's a big decision in itself, it's a small change, but it sends a very powerful signal that the Bank of England may now be moving in the direction of the United States, of a succession of rate rises. And we have, relative to America, a weak economy with a lot of personal indebtedness, the big clouds hanging over the country in the form of the Brexit negotiations. This may prove to be a move that the bank may have to reverse, and that would not be good for its
The problem, surely, is that the governor, in fact, was doing what he's charged with doing, which is keeping inflation under control. It's at 3%. It is set next month to go higher. He sees the red light and decides to make a very small but nevertheless significant move, in the sense that it's the first time rates have gone up for 10 years.
Well, there is a case, as you say, and that is the argument for the rate rise, that there is a shortage of labour, there is what could be inflationary pressure. In fact, the inflation that people are experiencing that is cutting into their living standards is largely because of the devaluation after the Brexit vote, pushing up costs rather than something that's generated within the UK. But that clearly is right, and that's something they had to consider.
Do you go so far as to fear a recession?
Over the last 10 years, the Bank of England has been increasingly concerned with just maintaining the growth of the economy and, basically providing a life support system. And if we're moving off that, we need to be very careful how it's done.
Do you have fears, briefly, of a recession?
No, I'm not predicting a recession. The economy has been slowing down. We're now at the bottom end of the range of developed countries. If Brexit negotiations turn out badly and we finish up crashing out, then we could have a very, very serious economic crisis, a recession or worse. But, that's something, hopefully, that will be avoided.
Vince Cable, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Gateshead.
Thank you.
Now, if you're old enough to remember the original House of Cards on the BBC, you will have spent today wondering if you'd taken a wrong turn and wandered into one of its more outlandish fictional episodes. Because after the Defence Secretary was forced to fall on his sword last night, who should be appointed to replace him today but the Chief Whip himself, the man who some held partly responsible for Sir Michael Fallon's resignation in the first place. In short, the announcement triggered a wave of criticism, much of it positively vitriolic, some of it unrepeatable on a family programme such as this, and most of it from his own MPs. Who needs an opposition when you have that much anger inside your own party?
He knows all about war and peace in his party, but now he's in charge of defending the country. The man on the right promoted from Chief Whip to Defence Secretary, because the last one lost his battle with rumours of misbehaviour.
Do you know any more secrets, Minister? Have you got a clean record?
And does his record display the experience to run such a crucial Department of State? He has no real military or ministerial track record.
I've been a minister as Chief Whip, but it was a little bit quieter when he was Chief Whip. Not so much publicity, but it's a privilege to be able to step into this role.
Many think it's more of a liberty, that he promoted himself, the Prime Minister too weak to say no. Within minutes of his appointment, the Conservative MP Sarah Wollaston tweeted, "There are times when offered a job that it would be better to advise that another would be more experienced and suited to the role." Her colleague Anna Soubry replied, "It does rather look like he picked himself a plum job." Another minister texted tonight, "It's like he's cashed in an insurance policy." His move also means one for his ally, Julian Smith, who goes from Deputy to Chief Whip. And in turn, he's replaced by Esther McVeigh, who's been a minister before.
Yes, I'm obviously very pleased to be a part of the government at this important time, and hopefully I can bring maybe a feminine touch to the Whip's office and work with all my colleagues, something that I'm really looking forward to. Thank you.
Their rise was thanks to this man's fall. Michael Fallon stood down yesterday after being accused of putting his hand on a journalist's knee. and other resignations could follow. The Prime Minister's second-in-command, Damien Green, is already being investigated for inappropriate behaviour too, as some accused of misdemeanours complain of a witch hunt.
The vast majority of the accusations are utterly fallacious. In fact, accusations against people, for example me, I really find it hurtful and absolutely wrong and in a way libelous.
And there's no truth in any of the accusations about you, for example?
No, none whatsoever, and I'm really jarred off by it.
Tonight, not everyone seems bothered by the comings and goings here, but by inviting an unlikely new Defence Secretary through her door today, the Prime Minister may have encouraged those who want her kicked out of it.
And Paul joins us now. Paul, even by the standards of Westminster, that was quite some reaction to the Chief Whip's appointment today. What did you make of it?
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. I mean, if last night the problem was the resignation, well, tonight the problem is the replacement. Rarely has a reshuffle, I think, gone down quite so badly as it did today. Everywhere you looked in there, people whispering against walls and scowling in corridors. The chief accusation here is that his promotion has come out of nothing. Not nothing, actually, Tom, but his promotion has come out of the Prime Minister's weakness.
Well, I guess you would say that part of what the promotion's come out of is the harassment scandal that's been sweeping Westminster in recent days, and there's been more on that this evening.
Yeah, a new accusation has emerged this evening, Tom, this time about a Labour MP, Kelvin Hopkins. The party has confirmed to me tonight that he has been suspended over allegations in the Telegraph newspaper. Now, that newspaper alleges that in 2014 he went to a Labour event at Essex University where he tightly hugged a young Labour activist and sexually rubbed himself up against her. Now, she claims that following that there were a series of inappropriate conversations, including a text from Kelvin Hopkins, where he said to her, "A nice young man would be lucky to have you as a girlfriend and lover, were I to be young." Now, worse than that, she claims that she reported this to the party and they did nothing, though tonight they are investigating. We haven't been able to get hold of Kelvin Hopkins this evening, neither has the Telegraph, so we don't know what he has to say about this. But there have been several accusations this week of the Labour Party not taking these claims seriously, and tonight we have been leaked this, the party's new sexual harassment policy, its complaints procedure, and this has upset a lot of people today because key in it is a new complaints panel which will be elected, and has been elected in fact, by the National Executive Committee. It is stuffed full of people from the party. People are asking now, how on earth can that be impartial? And all of the parties are going to have to get their procedure for complaints in order because, Tom, those complaints just keep coming.
They certainly do. All right, Paul, thank you very much indeed.
First tonight, the breaking political story. The Labour MP Kelvin Hopkins has been suspended from the party after it received allegations of inappropriate behaviour towards a young woman. The Labour Party is remaining relatively tight-lipped about it. Our political editor, Nick Watt, is here. Nick, what can you tell us about this?
Well, Kelvin Hopkins, the 76-year-old former shadow cabinet minister, has been suspended from the Labour Party, and that means that the whip is automatically suspended from him after an incident that took place in 2014 with a young Labour activist, Eva Etzam-Madze. And he was addressing the Labour Society at Essex University, and it is alleged that he then sent a text afterwards saying, "If only I was 40 years younger," and this is why he's been suspended, that he then allegedly rubbed himself against her.
Now, by the accounts in the Telegraph, Eva reported it to the Whip's office twice before Kelvin Hopkins was made a shadow cabinet minister. So, if that is to be believed, then the Whips knew about this.
Well, and that's not all. Ava reported it in December 2015. In June 26, Kelvin Hopkins was appointed, as you say, to the shadow cabinet. And but that point, he had been reprimanded by the party, and the leader's office knew that he had been reprimanded. As I understand it, the report that went to the leader's office was, yes, he has been reprimanded, but the matter had been settled. And the only information they knew at that stage was that he'd sent this text saying, "If only I was 40 years younger," and Ava crucially wanted to be anonymous. It was only today that the further information came through that he sent a text essentially saying that he wanted to meet outside the formal Essex University Society event, and crucially only today that the information came through of this very serious sexual harassment that he had, a sexual assault, that he had rubbed himself against her, and that was why the Labour Party acted immediately.
Yes, but as it happened tonight, it's only after the Telegraph has produced this story that we've had that kind of response from the Labour Party. Again, it means that, you know, they're having to be made to react rather than being proactive. Now, on the story in the front page of The Sun, there is more on Michael Fallon, which might give some clue as to his demise. In the front page of The Sun, we have another story about his behaviour.
So this is reporting, and this may well explain why he resigned, and he resigned so very quickly, that he is alleged to have told Andrea Leadsom, his fellow cabinet colleague, who complained of cold hands. He said, "I know a warm place to put them." Which obviously is, you know, obviously deeply, deeply inappropriate, and that may well explain why he resigned so quickly. But there are allegations that there are sort of serial examples of wholly inappropriate behaviour by Sir Michael Fallon.
Now, those allegations would have gone to the Chief Whip's office. The Chief Whip, Gavin Williamson, is now the Defence Secretary. Now, you can look at that two ways, that he is a very close ally of Theresa May's, or that she didn't act with elan and produce a woman for that office.
Well, that he ran Theresa May's leadership campaign, and she likes people and likes to promote people that she trusts. But there is absolute fury that Gavin Williamson has been made Defence Secretary, because don't forget, he was involved in the conversation with Michael Fallon saying, "Is there anything more?" And the answer to that meant that he resigned from the cabinet. Now, Downing Street are saying that Gavin Williamson wasn't then involved in the next level of conversation, which is who should be our new Defence Secretary. But that's not how it's being seen. I've been in touch with somebody who has worked quite closely with Theresa May in the past, and many are saying that this appointment is her biggest and probably last mistake, that Gavin Williamson and, crucially, his deputy Julian Smith, who is now replaced him as Chief Whip, are seen as parasites feeding off her weakness and using it to advance themselves. So, look, I've been looking at these issues today, and you see how angry Theresa May is over this. She's been campaigning to change the culture at Westminster, and now this is really sort of posing a challenge to her premiership.